It's Thursday, April 30th, 2026. SCOTUS says it's time for Southern governors to get moving. Oil prices to the moon yet again. And it's time to listen to Erika Kirk. Next on the AM Update. Huge case out of the Supreme Court yesterday in a 6-3 decision. The Supreme Court issued a shocking ruling about congressional maps, specifically one in Louisiana that was drawn to give black voters a boost in representation. The case, Louisiana v. Calais, involved a challenge by Louisiana voters in a congressional district that was redrawn after the 2020 census. The Supreme Court struck the map down and concluding it was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander that cannot be justified under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Justice Samuel Alito penned the majority opinion of the court and was joined by his 5 fellow justices, conservative justices. Elena Kagan, Sonia Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented, and Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion in which he was joined by Neil Gorsuch. The Supreme Court decided the time had come to deliver a clear answer on what for 30 years had simply been assumed about the Voting Rights Act case law. Essentially what this means, as I just said there in different terms, you no longer have to draw maps based on representations. And the way the Voting Rights Act is written is that you basically cannot have an outcome where there is a protected minority that is, quote unquote, underrepresented. Now, underrepresented, that's my terminology, but that's kind of the idea of the Voting Rights Act. So you can draw congressional districts now the way that they kind of make sense for you or the people of your state believe they want them to be. So that's kind of the outcome of what we saw yesterday. There are some other codicils there, but it is a huge deal. What this means now is that in the South, in southern states where the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, has had a big impact, that means that Republicans could gain conservatively between 12 and as many as 20 to 25 seats. I've seen in some higher estimations as well. So no doubt, politically, a huge deal at the Supreme Court yesterday. Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader, seems to think the same thing.
Today's decision by this illegitimate Supreme Court majority strikes a blow against the Voting Rights Act and is designed to undermine the ability of communities of color all across this country to elect their candidate of choice. But we're not here to step back. We're here to fight back.
Yes.
So that may be the explanation for why Hakeem Jeffries has talked about Trump and redistricting in terms of maximum warfare. Some comments that he's gotten in trouble for now because he might have seen this coming down the pike. And that's an unfair characterization, not an accurate characterization from Hakeem Jeffries there. Essentially what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was intended to do was not allow Southern Democrats to draw congressional districts that basically had the intent of excluding black voters. Now, what the Voting Rights Act and Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act does is drawing districts to ensure that there is an overrepresentation of black representatives in Congress. That's unfair. That's a different type of unfair. And the Supreme Court yesterday said its time has come. So we heard earlier this week that the Florida special legislative session was getting together to redraw Florida's congressional districts. They're already basically done. The Senate and the House in Florida have passed that measure, which now heads to Governor Ron DeSantis' desk. That will basically nix Virginia's referendum from last week. If it even holds up in the Virginia Supreme Court, that is heading to Governor DeSantis' desk. Back to Iran, President Trump on Truth Social posted a provocative image of himself. Looks like maybe from Iron Man. You know, when he's holding up his hands and the explosions behind him, the original Iron Man movie. It's himself with like a M16 or some sort of AR rifle. And he posted this meme, "No more Mr. Nice Guy." He said, Iran can't get their act together. They don't know how to sign a non-nuclear deal. They better get smart soon. President DJT. At the White House yesterday, President Trump added,
Depends. We're having talks with them now, and we're not flying anymore with 18-hour flights every time we want to see a piece of paper. We're doing it telephonically, and it's very nice. I make a call, or I have my people make a call, and you know the answer. I always like face-to-face. I consider it better. But when you have to fly 18 hours every time you want to have a meeting, and you know what the meeting's all about, and you know they're going to give you a piece of paper that you don't like before you even leave. It's ridiculous. They've come a long way. The question is whether or not they're going to go far enough. So at this moment, there will never be a deal unless they agree that there will be no nuclear weapons.
Those various comments, both from Truth Social and in the West Wing from President Trump, come as reports are circulating that he's considering additional but limited strikes against Iran, maybe potentially from these reports on infrastructure, energy infrastructure. Now, we're being told as well, reports surfacing this week, that Iran is almost to the end of its storage capacity for oil. What that means is they either have to start burning off the oil they're extracting from the ground or stop their oil extraction wells, which once you stop those, it's hard to get them running again. So we're coming up against a sticky situation, no pun intended, for Iran. I've been telling you this week, my only analysis for Iran is going to be the price of oil. And it seems like the oil markets have more strikes against Iran in their pricing, because the price of oil, just WTI crude, this is American crude, this is West Texas, shot up $108 a barrel last I saw yesterday. So it certainly seems like markets think that more instability is on the way for the Middle East. In Congress yesterday, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth testified in front of a panel where he called out specifically Congressman Garamendi of North Carolina. Apologies to Mr. Garamendi, if I'm mispronouncing your name. Never heard of you before. Secretary of War Hegseth had some very strong words for him and what he characterized as a quagmire in Iran. Listen to this.
But if I may.
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't get a chance. I didn't see a question in the statement from the congressman. I hope you appreciate how reckless it is. When I said reckless, feckless, and defeatist of congressional Democrats at the beginning, that came after watching you say the same thing on CNN this morning, a quagmire. My generation served in a quagmire in Iraq and Afghanistan, years and years of nebulous missions and utopian nation building that led us to nothing. What we have right now, the way you stain the troops when you tell them 2 months in, Congressman, you should know better. Shame on you. Calling this a quagmire 2 months in. The effort, what they've undertaken, what they've succeeded, the success on the battlefield that could create strategic opportunities, the courage of a president to confront a nuclear Iran, and you call it a quagmire, handing propaganda to our enemies. Shame on you for that statement. And statements like that are reckless to our troops. Don't say I support the troops on one hand, and then a 2-month mission is a quagmire. That's a false equivalation. Who are you cheering for here? Who are you pulling for?
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth not happy with that North Carolina congressman. On the topic of the raids in Minnesota on certain facilities, let's call them, that may or may not be engaged in some form of fraud, Fraud czar, that would be Vice President J.D. Vance, provided an update.
We have to follow the law where it leads. And what we know is that there were multiple Minnesota authorities who were turning a blind eye to this fraud. What we don't yet know is whether they knew it was going on as it was going on. But that's one of the things that we're looking at with these investigations. We're not going to, we're not going to let anybody who committed a crime off the hook. And in fact, if you're a senior officer, if you're the attorney general or the governor or any other elected official, we're going to look extra hard at what you knew and when you knew it and how connected your actions were to this fraud scheme. But it's part of the reason why we're serving these warrants, Will, is because, of course, people don't come out and tell you, oh, yeah, I knew that the Quality Leering Center was committing fraud and people were getting rich off of it and I did nothing. People don't say that. So we've got to do the investigatory work to understand what was known, when it was known, and by whom. That's a big part of the reason why the fraud investigation, these warrants that we saw being served all across the city of Minneapolis, why that's such a big deal.
Vice President J.D. Vance, also known as the fraud czar, with an update on some of those raids we saw and talked about earlier this week in Minnesota, going after the rampant, we think, or we're being told, the rampant fraud in the Gopher State. Checking in on New York City, Mayor Zoran Mamdani says, hey, he's just begun to give away free stuff.
New York City faces a budget crisis.
And there you have it. When we come back, SCOTUS wasn't done. The Voting Rights Act was not the only thing they ruled on yesterday. We'll tell you about that. Also, the Department of Justice not done this week as well, and it's time to listen to Erika Kirk. That and more coming up next. A Christian pro-life pregnancy resource center can fight in federal court in the state of New Jersey's order to submit a broad spectrum of documents, including the identity of financial donors. That's according to the U.S. Supreme Court in a, get this, unanimous 9-0 decision yesterday. The case came to the High Court after New Jersey successfully blocked first-choice women's resources centers from challenging in federal court the state's 2022 subpoena of 28 categories of documents, subpoenaed among other information, and which the High Court said was most pertinent to the court cases were donors' names, phone numbers, addresses, and places of employment. The release of such donor information would violate their First Amendment right to freely associate. That's a center said in a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court agreed. The High Court reversed a lower court decision that favored New Jersey's Attorney General's contention that the centers had no standing to sue. Based on precedent, the question before us answers itself, Gorsuch wrote. First Choice has established a present injury to its First Amendment associational rights, thereby has standing to sue in federal court. The High Court remanded the case back to the lower court for trial. So I'm not sure why the New Jersey Attorney General. I have an idea why, but that's neither here nor there. The Attorney General asking this pro-life pregnancy resource center, what would be the possible legitimate explanation for why they would ask pro-life pregnancy resource centers for donor information, email addresses, phone numbers, names? What could be the innocent explanation for that? And even Ketanji Brown Jackson, who agreed with this decision and this 9-0 unanimous decision, if even you're forcing her to say there's no innocent explanation for this, I don't know what a woman is, but I got nothing for this. How bad was that case? Yikes. Department of Justice continues on the warpath this week. Federal grand jury handed down indictments for Christopher, Diana, and Paige Ostroushko, connected to the assault on Turning Point USA reporter Savannah Hernandez at a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement protest in Minneapolis earlier in April. The suspects were indicted on Tuesday, with their names released in the indictment yesterday. Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Kash Patel, told Fox, quote, when video of individuals assaulting Savannah Hernandez surfaced, this FBI immediately engaged and led the investigation, today landing federal charges. Conduct like this is completely unacceptable, Patel added. It was initially reported that only 2 of the 3 would be facing charges. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche announced that all 3 were indicted and will be facing charges. So you may have seen that incident earlier in April. Savannah Hernandez, journalist for Turning Point USA, clear as day, in the middle of day, on video, getting assaulted by these anti-ICE leftist orcs. Now they're facing potentially prison. Good for them. The new leader of Turning Point USA, that would be Erika Kirk, the widow of the martyr Charlie Kirk, went on and in to his studio yesterday to record a message for anyone who will listen. And I think it's time to listen to Miss Erika Kirk.
Everyone is asking why I even went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And it was because many of the journalists in that room have attempted to dehumanize me, and I wanted to meet some of them face to face, quite frankly. Why have a conversation about me when you can have a conversation with me? So, for example, a journalist from the Daily Mail came up to me. She introduced herself, and she was very gracious. She was saying, "You look so beautiful. I'm so sorry for your loss." To which I replied, "It is so nice to put a name to the face, especially with all of the slander, the lies, accusations that are out there surrounding my husband's murder and myself." And I said to her, "You know what's so interesting? This is my first time at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and I find it so fascinating, the dynamic that is going on right now, because everyone is all dressed up, and you guys are co-mingling in and out of each other's cocktail parties. And so for one night, you are able to put aside all of your differences for the sake of freedom of speech. And then by Monday morning, things will go back to being an absolute bloodbath between all of you. To which she replied, literally, she said, I know. Isn't it special, right? Isn't tonight so special?
So Erika Kirk explains why she was at the White House Correspondents Association dinner. It wasn't just to yuck it up for the sake of yucking it up while her young children are at home. It's because she wanted to go confront and actually face some of the people who have been lying and slandering her face to face. That's why she went. And she left in tears because another would-be assassin, much like the assassin who actually got to her husband, was able to get close and ended in a cacophony of gunshots. Erika Kirk went on.
In this culture we're living in, absorbs disagreement as a form of personal betrayal. It turns having an opposing viewpoint into a moral crime worthy of punishment. And here's what I've realized through all of this, truly, having lived through quite literal hell these past 7 months, if you strip someone of their humanity long enough, you will arrive at the chilling conclusion that they don't deserve to exist at all. Every morning I wake up to a new headline lying about me. I have comedians dressing up in whiteface. I have people saying I'm not fit to be CEO. And I have Candace Owens claiming I murdered my husband. And the list goes on and on and on. There is a serious epidemic of dehumanization plaguing this country.
Indeed, there is. In the book of James, it specifically talks about religion that's pure and undefiled. And one of the markers of religion that's pure and undefiled, caring for widows and orphans. Yeah, lefties like to quote, feeding the poor, caring for widows, caring for orphans, as their mantra of their Che Guevara, Jesus is my boyfriend version of Jesus. But when it comes to the nitty gritty, does a widow like Erika Kirk, does she count as a widow? Yes, she does. If religion that is pure and undefiled, the markers of which is bridling one's tongue, as James says, is caring for the widow, caring for the orphan, and keeping oneself unstained from the world. What is the opposite of religion that's pure and undefiled? That would be utter and abject corruption. That's what that would be. Contempt for widows. Contempt for the children. The unbridling of one's tongue. Wrapping yourself in the world. Getting it all over you. Let's start back to front with that. There have been a number of posts detailing how much Candace Owens' wardrobe costs. Candace Owens sounds like somebody who bridles her tongue on a regular basis, doesn't it? Candace Owens sounds like someone who really cares about widows like Erika, doesn't she? Not quite. You wonder, many tekel a parson when it comes to stories like this. Are we being weighed and measured? I hope certain people are. I hope they don't bring us all down with them. Let's get to this, our poll of the week. I asked you, Sunday marks 6 months to the midterms as of now. What do you believe is the likely outcome? I gave you 4 options to choose from. Republican Senate, Republican House, Democrat Senate, Republican House, Republican Senate, Democrat, and so on and so forth. Here is the number one answer, with 58% of respondents saying a Republican Senate and a Democrat-held House is the most likely outcome of the midterms. In second place, nearly 32% say a Democrat Senate and a Democrat House. You think the Democrats are going to take over everything. In third place, a Democrat Senate and a Republican House, 10.5%. And at 0.0%, you think there is no way Republicans can hold on to both chambers of Congress. Let's get to some of your replies. Right-wing Dad says Republicans will for sure lose the House, but I'm not sure about the Senate yet. It all depends on the SAVE Act. Thune is bound and determined to screw us. From what I've read, I'm not sure if this is accurate, so take this with a grain of salt. It certainly seems like the Supreme Court greenlit redistricting before this year's midterms, so we'll see about that. Trump, it says, Republicans would have to lose effectively all Senate races marked as battlegrounds, including Wyoming and Nebraska, to lose Senate control. As feckless as they are, even they won't be able to fail that badly. I agree with that analysis. Auburn says, did we include the majorities of R's as D's? No, we did not, but you probably should factor that into your math as well. Jim says, Democrats will sweep both chambers. Anyone trying to convince you that there's any motivation to vote GOP is either ignorant or lying. In Michigan, we have an Islamunist Senate candidate, Abdul El-Said. He'll beat the Republican by at least 5. That dynamic will play out nationwide. I pray you're wrong, Jim, but I want to see it first. Another Jim says, in our North Carolina Senate primary to replace Tillis, we chose a Republican that appears to be so much like Tillis, I'm not sure his mother could tell the difference. All right, I'm depressed this morning. I'm depressed. That's going to do it for Thursday. Tomorrow's Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can ask me any question you want. Tell me any news story you think needs covered on the AM Update. Look for the pin post at Real AM Update on X. Make your submissions there at Real AM Update on X. Have a wonderful Thursday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntire, and this is the AM Update.